But what I wanted to do is really just talk about two things. I wanted to talk about the Virginia elections, and then want to talk about how they bear on work that we are doing here, especially the discussions about health care and tax reform issues. So obviously I was really thrilled with the elections Tuesday night. Personally, it was a wonderful night for me because I campaigned with so many of these candidates in the last months and really saw among these House candidates tremendous energy, enthusiasm, first-time candidates, young candidates, women candidates, people saying, look, in this time in our country's life, get off the sidelines and go out and work, and it was really exciting to see it. Second, excited because of my personal connection to the statewide candidates. I worked very closely with Justin Fairfax. My campaign chairman when I was running for governor was playing the same role for Justin. We're really close. He's going to do a great job as lieutenant governor. Mark Herring was a legal ethics student of mine at the University of Richmond Law School back in the late 1980s, and I have really admired what he's done since. And then Ralph Northam, I well remember trying to convince Dr. Northam to run for the state senate. And then after he won in 2007, in March of 2008, I had him into my office when I was governor, and I said, you know, Ralph, I've decided, you've been here now all of 2 months, but I've decided you should be governor one day. You'd be a wonderful governor. And so it was a really personally gratifying feeling. I think the lesson of our election and the success in Virginia basically says three things. One, Democrats have put together a pretty amazing string of victories, 10 statewide elections in a row, 4 of the last 5 governor's races, 3 presidential elections in a row, and we do it by really running on just kind of bread and butter issues, jobs, education, and health care. The other side wants to make it about fear, demonize immigrants, Confederate monuments, etc., but we stick to the issues that matter the most to the most Virginians, how to build an economy that works for everybody, how to make sure people get the skills they need from pre-K to post-grad, apprenticeship, career, technical education, college, and how to make sure that we continue to expand people's access to health care, give them more choices, and bring costs down. And by running that kind of a campaign, I think we have been able to be really, really successful. Second, we don't fight with each other. You see at the national level, sometimes Dems want to get into big battles with each other. Those are so wasteful because it's about serving people, not about the internal battles. And in that vein, I want to really give praise to Tom Perriello. What a model. He ran a vigorous campaign in the primary to be governor. When he lost, he got right on board, and not only got on board with the ticket, but then played a critical role in the months after the primary in helping so many of these House members get elected. That's what we ought to be doing. Let's have vigorous nominating contests, but then pull together because people are counting on us and wasting time relitigating, you know, who was at fault for the 2016 Democratic primary. That's something that some Dems like to do that's just completely idiotic, and we minimize that in Virginia. Third, we reject the divisive style of a Donald Trump. I think Virginians saw Donald Trump for who he was, and that's one of the reasons why they supported Hillary Clinton with me on the ticket significantly in 2016. And if anything, he's turned out to be worse than many feared, and that's why Ralph Northam's margin was even bigger than the 5.5-point margin in 2016. His 9-point margin was because he ran on bread and butter issues, and people like that, and they don't like the divisive style that pits people against one another. That style worked in Virginia, sadly, in the past, but we're not letting it work now. And when somebody tries to divide us, it brings us together. And I think that Americans are increasingly feeling the same way. So that's what I feel about the election. What does it mean up here? The two issues that are hot right now, one of which I'm on the committee and in the thick of, and one of which I'm not on the committee, but obviously care a lot about, are health care and tax reform. After efforts by the Republicans to unilaterally repeal the Affordable Care Act with no meaningful public input and no participation by Democrats, their efforts failed in July. They made another run in September. They failed. We now have a solid bipartisan working group trying to find health care solutions. I'm proud to be part of a team that helped bring together a deal in the Senate. We have 25 co-sponsors, 12 Democrats, 12 Republicans, 1 independent, to try to stabilize the individual health insurance market so we can give people more choice, stop the specter of insurance companies pulling out, and bring premiums down. The unilateral actions of the Trump administration to destabilize the healthcare markets have caused great chaos, and we need to end the chaos and create some stability. And that's why I'm proud to be part of this bipartisan compromise. It's going to be a real test of this body as to whether we're able to accept compromise. Because with 25 co-sponsors of a bill of this kind, if we were to put it up for a vote on the floor of the Senate, we would probably get nearly 75 or 80 votes. We do not yet, though, have a commitment from the Republican majority leader that he will allow this to be voted on. We're working hard to either have a vote or maybe to attach it to a year-end spending bill. We have so much to do. Fund the government, reauthorize the CHIP program, which is so important for kids and their parents. But we ought to be able to find a bipartisan health care path as well to stabilize the market going forward, and then to talk about other important proposals that are on the table, including one that Senator Bennett and I have put on, Medicare X, a public insurance plan that individuals could buy with their own money, wouldn't increase the deficit, wouldn't increase taxes. We would roll it out in primarily rural communities in the United States in 2020, then everywhere by 2023. So that's health care. Given that Ralph ran as a doctor and ran on protecting health care, and that was seen as a really valuable thing by the Virginia voters that elected him, maybe that message of find health care solutions will percolate into the atmosphere here and will help us find solutions. The second issue is tax reform. We need to do tax reform. Hadn't been done since 1986. The code needs to be reformed, but when tax reform was done in 1986, it was done through a normal legislative process. Take time to get it right, introduce it before the relevant committees, allow majority and minority parties to both put their thumbprints on a tax reform bill, try to do something bipartisan and permanent to help the economy. The problem with the tax reform effort thus far in Congress is it's not being done the right way. Instead of trying to introduce a bill that would be considered and debated and amended by both parties through normal process, the Republicans are trying to do with tax reform the same thing they did with the repeal of the Affordable Care Act effort. They want to do it just with Republican votes. They're using a procedure called budget reconciliation that essentially is, look, we're the majority and we can do this just with our own votes, and they're not meaningfully including Democrats in the discussion. And for that reason, the proposal that they put on the table in the House, and it's likely to be followed by a Senate bill introduced today or tomorrow, has got some major problems with it. The bill thus far concentrates the benefits of the tax reform package all at the top. It is heavily, heavily weighted with the repeal of the estate tax and other proposed reforms. It's heavily weighted to just cutting taxes for the very wealthiest. It doesn't really help the middle class that much. There have been estimates that millions and millions of middle-class families will see their taxes go up if this passes. And small businesses also look at this as something, well, it may be helping big businesses, but it's not helping us. The National Federation for Independent Business jumped out very quickly after the House bill was put on the table and said, this doesn't help small businesses. Small businesses are the ones that grow the economy. It's not so much the big businesses, it's the small businesses and the startups that lead to economic growth, and there isn't much in this bill for them. Third, the bill is going to dramatically increase the deficit. We should do tax reform and do it in a way that is largely revenue neutral. We shouldn't do tax reform, especially with a low unemployment rate, in a way that would jack up the deficit. If we do that, it will likely increase interest rates, and that will hurt us economically. And then the last part of the tax reform plan that is problematic is in the House version, and likely it may even be more severe in the Senate version if what I hear is right, there's a set of moves that really hit Virginia very, very hard. If you eliminate or reduce the deductibility of state and local taxes, if you make adjustments to the home mortgage interest deduction, if you eliminate the new market tax credit or the historic preservation tax credit, which have been used by cities and communities all over Virginia to help rebuild their downtowns and make their communities safer and more economically productive, you end up hitting Virginia very, very hard. SALT and the two tax credit programs I mentioned, Virginia is among the largest users of these programs. And so I'm going to be looking at the Senate version when it comes out to see if it helps solve some of the four problems that I mentioned. The Republicans are bound and determined to try to find Republican votes to pass this. My hope is they will realize that if they pass a bill in reconciliation that's partisan, and that by reconciliation rules it has to be temporary with tax cuts that expire only to have a debate about reauthorization later, the better course would be to do it in a normal order where we could have a bipartisan discussion and do permanent tax relief in a way that will grow the economy and help the middle class and small businesses. With that, I'm very, very glad to open it up and take your questions.
Hey everyone, we have a little bit of a different conference call system today, so if you have a question, you should go ahead and push #5 on your phone. That will allow you to individually unmute yourself. If you're not asking a question, just make sure you remute yourself on your phone. So that's #5.
Good morning, Senator Kaine. This is Stephanie Harris from Wavy TV.
Hey, Stephanie.
How are you today?
Great.
So the vote the other night is seen in Virginia as kind of a stick it to President Trump vote. You, of course, were on the ticket with Hillary Clinton. How much of that was a personal victory for you? How were you feeling along those lines on election night?
You know, the victory felt very personal, but not because of the president. I don't really know the president. It felt personal because of the personal connection I had to so many of the candidates. I told you about Ralph. You know, I'm not sure Ralph was even thinking about political office when a bunch of us came to Dr. Ralph Northam and said, look, you've served your country in the military, you've served your patients as a physician, can you serve the Commonwealth and run for the state Senate? So I feel like I've been on this path with Ralph to convince him to run and then to tell him as early as March '08, I think you should be governor one day. So I will admit to having a lot of personal feelings the other night, but the personal feelings were this guy Ralph Northam or Mark Herring, who was my law student, or some of these amazing House candidates, you know, Chris Hurst, just to use the example. You know, Chris was the boyfriend of this, you know, wonderful, wonderful TV journalist who was killed on air in Roanoke. And I know Allison's family. I know her parents very, very well. So when that happened, it was a shocker to the world and to Virginia, but it was also very personal. And to see Chris Hurst take that tragedy in his life and turn it into a victory in the House. I felt strong personal connections to these people, and so that was for that reason, I was very personally invested in winning and felt very, very good about the other night.
Thank you, Senator.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Senator, it's Mike Gooding down at Channel 13 in Norfolk.
Hey, Mike.
I've got a couple of military things for you.
Yes, you bet.
There's this criminal case down here at Little Creek involving this contractor called Ashanti Billy, who apparently got abducted from Little Creek and was found deceased in North Carolina some days later. I don't know if you've received any briefing or have any kind of intel on that, but if you have concerns, obviously, about security at military installations such as Little Creek, that something like this could happen, A, and B, if you've got anything, thoughts on the Air Force dropping the ball on the Texas gunman, and therefore he was able to get a gun and go shoot up the people in the church.
Yeah, Mike, well, the situation with the young woman who was abducted and killed is just heartbreaking. I don't have any additional intel to offer right now, but yeah, the question about these military bases, they have pretty good security. I've been on a lot of military bases, so how could something like this happen? What were warning signs? How could we avoid this? And I'll segue into Texas. The question about this investigation is always what happened, but more importantly, even more importantly than what happened, is how can we reduce the risk of it happening again? And that's the way the Air Force IG has got to dig into the situation in Texas. How could this individual have been charged and convicted of such serious offenses, domestic assault against a spouse and against a baby, and serving a jail term within the military, and not have that information be included in the National Incident Database, the NICS system? Mike, we know this really well because the shooting at Virginia Tech involved the failure to introduce information into the NICS system when Sung-Wi Cho had been adjudicated mentally ill and dangerous by a court in Southwest Virginia. That information was supposed to be introduced into the NICS system. The courts in Virginia were making a mistake. They were not introducing that evidence if somebody wasn't also ordered to inpatient treatment. I was able to fix that by executive order. That taught me a powerful, powerful lesson, which is the more comprehensive background check system you have, the more you can keep weapons away from those who federal law has determined should not have weapons. We need to have the most comprehensive background record check system we can. We need to have this data introduced into the NICS system to protect against incidents like this. And we will get to the bottom of it, not just with respect to the Air Force, but this question raises a more general question about DOD-wide, what about in the other service branches? Are other service branches introducing this information into the NICS system or not? So I think there may be a series of changes that may be required when the Air Force IG concludes the investigation about this particular failure.
Senator Joe DeShield, WDBJ.
Hey, Joe.
Hello, Senator. We're hearing some concern from private colleges in our area on the tax reform proposals, most notably proposal to impose an excise tax on college endowments. That would affect some of our private colleges particularly hard. And I was just wondering if that's an issue that's on your radar screen, something that you're taking a look at.
It is. There's a series of smaller moves. I put 4 big issues on the table, but there's the elimination of the deductibility of extraordinary medical expenditures, which families, especially if they have any kind of a high-cost medical care, which is often the case if a family member is disabled. I've heard from a lot of people on that one. Reduction of the of tax credits for companies that hire veterans. That's eliminated in the House bill. And so what, you're going to take away the tax credit to hiring a veteran in order to give an estate tax giveaway to people at the top end? It just makes no sense. But one of the others is the one you mentioned. There's a proposal to get revenue by imposing a tax on the endowments of private colleges. Now, this is in the House bill. I'm not sure it's going to be in the Senate bill, but we're really going to have to take a look and see, is it equitable? Why, for example, if there is a uniform policy of applying a small tax to endowments of foundations, et cetera, then maybe you would want to treat colleges equally to that. But is it fair to tax private colleges and not public? Is it a good idea to do that at all? These are the kinds of questions we're going to have to grapple with, and I've already spoken with a number of colleges about it, and that issue is definitely on my radar screen. Just so you'll know procedurally, everybody, the House is going to, I think they will likely pass a bill. They'll skirmish about it, but the House operates by a majority rule, and usually the majority can pass something like this. The Senate bill is going to look significantly different because the House doesn't have to follow the Senate reconciliation rules. The Senate is bound and determined to do this in a reconciliation environment that puts some different constraints on what they do. So I think you'll see the Senate bill will have some significant differences from the House bill, and whether that college endowment excise tax is in there or not, we will know probably within 24 hours.
Reminder, if we have any other questions, you just push #5 on your phone to jump in.
Hello, Senator?
Yes.
Yeah, hi, this is Gene Moreno from WFIR Radio in Roanoke.
Hey, Gene, great, thank you.
I just wanted to ask you a question about go back to the Democratic gains in the House of Delegates.
Yes.
You put your governor's hat back on.
Yep.
Because it's so close now, does it compel the two parties, does it compel the Republicans to work closer with the Democrats on issues, or do they just dig their heels in even more?
Well, look, we will see, but they should read the results of the election and understand what the voters were saying. The voters would want them to work in a cooperative way to make some things happen. I'll tell you, if there was a theme in the GOP elections, if there was a theme in the House of Delegates elections, it was a massive repudiation of House members for failing to expand Medicaid. Virginians have been paying taxes to enable 450,000 working Virginians to get Medicaid expansion, but then refusing to accept the federal Medicaid money and actually provide that health care. That is a health care disaster, it's a humanitarian disaster, and it's fiscally incredibly stupid. Every one of the Democrats who flipped a Republican seat said, I'm going to work to expand Medicaid, and my opponent has been standing in the way with Virginians paying taxes and refusing to accept the Medicaid benefit that we should get because we're paying taxes. So I think on an issue like Medicaid expansion, where the Senate has been more willing to do it and the House has been the body standing in the way, with the election of a doctor as governor and with the major gains that were picked up by the Democrats the other night, I think it makes it much more likely that we finally join the 30-plus other states that have expanded Medicaid.
Okay, folks, we have time for one more question if anyone wanted to jump on, or we can call it here.
Yeah, Joe.
Can you speak on that same subject on the national level? Do you think the message from the Virginia election will push more Republicans to move toward compromise?
Again, it should. The Republicans nationally are doing their own soul searching about this. I think it was a repudiation of the kind of Trump divisiveness. I definitely think that was a big part of the message, and even the dynamic here in the last couple of days since the election seems to be maybe recognizing, just going down the divisive path of pitting people against one another. It's certainly not the Virginia way, and I don't think it's the American way either. That's one of the reasons that President Trump's numbers have lagged, and it's also one of the reasons that President Trump has had very little success in his legislative agenda. He can blame Congress all he wants, but the problem is when he name calls members of Congress, and frankly, he name calls Republican members of Congress more than Democrats. Surprise, surprise, it doesn't make it easy for him to get his work done. So he should stop trying to divide people and instead look for common ground and behave in a presidential way to bring people together. I think that is a message coming out of Virginia, and since Virginia is a pretty good microcosm for the nation, I would suspect that that view would be pretty commonly felt around the country, and that may lead to some more opportunities to cooperate.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We appreciate it, and I hope you have a great day.